Hello, good night. I want to talk about Marco Rubio tonight. And the main reason why I want to talk about him is because he has surprised most of the populace here in America with some of his absolutely amazing performance. So I was wondering, what is it, right? What is it different that he brings into the politics game that we haven't seen before? And I think that what's different is the background that he has. So he's bringing all the Latin flavor, all the kind of like Latin passion into the Anglo-Saxon arena. And just as to clarify, I do think Marco Rubio is 100% American. I'm not kind of, making him less American than any other American out there. Yet, I think that he definitely has that different quality than other politicians that we're used to see. And everyone is delighted by it. You can go on X or even here in YouTube and you can see, some kind of like the memes around Rubio's performance and kind of attitude. And so I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk what is that his background brings into this new arena, into this politics arena. And I did a little bit of research before jumping into this because it was very intuitive at first. So I needed to do a little bit more of digging. And I've discovered that they're having studies about this type of characteristics or features of the Latin culture. And somehow he fits in some of these features. So starting with number one, hierarchy. Latin cultures are very much prone to respect and honor hierarchies. And you can see that very clearly in much of the history of, kind of like Latin America and even some Latin European countries like Italy or Spain, where they tend to, fall into dictatorships. It's like this populace, the people kind of like tend to follow the lead or follow the leader or follow the authority. And that's mainly because of this understanding of innate understanding of hierarchy. And I think that Marco Rubio follows that very, very clearly. Every time he talks, he mentions the president. He never forgets to mention the president. Every action that he does when he, is kind of like explaining or giving context or, justifying why was that done, he will bring in the president. So the figure of the president in his role and like how he's taking his role is, I would say, the number one driver, on like understanding like that hierarchy. Okay, I don't know if it just that last sentence, I don't know if it made a lot of sense. But anyways, hierarchy, the number one, and I think he's so open about it that is kind of like disrupting the usual way that we see from other politicians, right? That loyalty, because that hierarchy as a consequence brings in the loyalty. And he's very loyal, and you can see that and in the way that he expresses himself. The second thing that I see on Rubio is the way that he addresses things. So his style, and that is very common also. Like he has a very he has a very kind of like clear way to say things, but then also they come up with a little bit of implicit attitude. So let me backtrack a little bit. Historically, Latin cultures are oratorial. So the emphasis are usually placed in the narrative or in the rhetoric or in the words and what is it said over the method or over the system or over the results, which is, that's kind of like more of an Anglo, kind of like an Anglo feature or characteristic. In Latin cultures, the oratorial portion of politics, I would say it's almost like a 70%. I would dare to say that if you're not super aggressive with it, and by aggressive I don't mean violent, but I mean like aggressive as in implementing them, you might not ever get elected. You might get absolutely behind. And the first time that the Anglo world or the Western world saw that in first person is with Donald Trump. But if you go to any other South American country, we've seen that kind of like aggressive discourse or rhetoric plenty of times, you can see it with, like almost every presidential election in Argentina. I recall like, these hardcore discourses, and like they are kind of, they get very spicy. And so he has some of that spice as well, right? Like that is kind of like that performative way of addressing things. So he understands performance very well. In a way, he understands that power is to be performed, right? Or like in that world, that's how power is displayed, by performing power. And he knows how to perform that very well. And so that's another element of surprise for the general public when with this new kind of a politician that has emerged. And then last, the other kind of a uniqueness that he brings into this administration is his understanding of politics. And I'm calling this understanding like the way that I'm kind of seeing this is that his approach to politics is very pragmatic in the following way. He understands two things about politics very well. He understands that politics are power, and he understands that there's a lot of corruption in politics. And he just kind of like drives from that very blunt understanding. Whether perhaps in other spheres, there's almost like more of a naive, it's almost like a naive understanding, but or a naive kind of way of doing things. And so let's say a Ron Paul, or like I don't know, like a libertarian, and it's kind of like, it's a little bit more of a okay, so let's do things this way, let's have consensus, this is not the way, this is not ideal. He's raw. I mean, he understands that politics sometimes means just like like just exerting your power, and he understands that very well. Or else your enemy will come after you. And that's definitely part of his upbringing and his background. So I think those are the three main reasons why he's kind of like having this, display of surprise all over the internet. I personally have been surprised myself too. I thought he was little Marco Rubio. And then all of a sudden he's kind of like become this Latin emperor, just commanding left and right and like what has to be done. So anyways, I hope that was kind of like entertaining or informative, or that you enjoyed it. I appreciate your time to see this, and hope this you enjoyed it. Bye.